Well, I've got a real fun lesson today. I'm always looking for experiences for the students. And in this particular lesson, they're going to be working with hot press paper, which is a very different paper from cold press. It's absolutely smooth on the surface. So when you wet it, the water lays on the surface and dries unevenly. Sometimes it soaks in places, other times it lays almost like a puddle. So when you do an underpainting, you never know if the surface is going to be wet, semi-wet, or dry. And it very easily causes bleed backs. It lifts really well, which is a good thing or a bad thing, because we are going to be doing some layering. And often when you layer, one thing you don't want is the color underneath to lift. It's just something we'll have to be aware of and deal with it if we have a problem. Another experience we're going to have is we're going to be doing some collage work, and that's always fun. It's a mixed media combining some collage with the watercolor. We're also going to be doing some color sanding, which is fun, and we're also going to work in a somewhat what I like to call alla prima style. In other words, when we prepare our underpainting, we're done. We don't have to do a lot of negative work. So I'm going to start with the painting that was the inspiration for this lesson. This painting I did quite a few years ago, and one of the things I really enjoyed was I was trying to design a path of light so I could work with dark flowers. So I worked with the theme of roses, and I did this underpainting using the collage and developing my corners so I had this triad of whites going through. And I just really enjoyed this, and now I came up with this lesson to follow it up. Enter the new era here. Now what I'm doing is I'm designing the path of light, but I'm just doing this underpainting with no negative painting in the final picture. And it's kind of refreshing to just paint the flowers without having to deal with any negative painting. And it was kind of fun because we did this lesson in the springtime when the roadside poppies and the lupines were out. Before we start, I wanted to show you a really cool little technique. I've done this before, but I think it works especially well with this particular lesson. Now these are stamps that you can just purchase. They're commercial stamps. I don't like the ones that say have a nice day or happy birthday, but this one is really unique. It's actually an Italian love sonnet. It's just a part of it, and you can't really read it. Not only because it's in a foreign language, but because it's just a partial part of the whole sonnet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some very rich color. I don't even have to activate it on my palette. And I'm just going to take a flat brush and lay it like this against the textures on the stamp. So I'm putting a little quinacridone burnt orange and a little Antwerp blue. I try to pick colors that are very dark in value so that you're going to get a nice stamp. Now the very first one you stamp is usually very dark. Aha, see that? The second one is almost always perfect. Look at that. And then the third one I call a ghost. And this one, what I'm basically doing now is cleaning off the stamp, and I'm just getting a ghost. So I generally don't even clean the stamp after that point. I just like it like this. And then when we go about using these, I actually just rip off a little part of it and glue it in transitional areas. You'll see that later. But one of the things I never do is I never take and actually stamp directly on my picture. I do it through this technique I'm going to share with you. I'm going to be working with several archival papers that come to us. Again, they're commercial rice paper. And we have the Thai White Enru. This is a fibered paper, very lightweight. It's only 10 grams. And then we're also going to use this very heavily fibered Oguru. This is a very, very thick paper. We're just going to use little pieces of it and pull it open to work with. So let's get started. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to think about what am I going to do for my little path of light. So what I'm going to do is take a pen And I'm going to design my little path of light. And this is really important because once you wet the paper and get started, it's kind of hard to remember. So you can see a path of light would be good down here, going down like this and going up here into the corner, would catch these two flowers, and it would come down, and then I could just sort of go down into the corner here. So, and I like, rather than doing a straight cruciform, which would be 4 edges that are touched, I'm just going to touch, well, I guess I am touching all 4 because this one's going out the corner. But anyway, it basically looks like a 1, 2, 3 kind of shape. So I'm just going to put that up here as a little reminder. And we're going to start by wetting our paper on the back and the front. Now what I'm going to do is start with a triad of primary colors. So I'm going to start up here with my Winsor yellow, and I'm going to kind of paint around the subject. Not perfectly, just kind of. And then I'm going to kind of bookend this over here a little bit. So it stops here, goes through the white path, and picks up again like over here. Now down here, ooh, look at this, gets kind of complicated because there's so many shapes and things. So don't worry if a little bit goes through here. Now we're going to have the white path, and so now I want to come over here and do a little bit. Now notice I haven't identified the entire white path because I'm going to come in with some other colors. So the next color I'm going to choose is my Quinacridone Coral. This is a lovely color, not quite as pink as Permanent Rose, but just lovely. I'm going to put a little bit of this over the yellow to get kind of an orange. I'm also going to put it in its own space and cross it over here to the other side. As you can see, I'm kind of going in between the shapes here. So now I'm going to come down here in the corner with this color. Go off the page. And be sure, like if you come up to an edge like this, don't stop painting. A lot of people do. Bookend that color over to the other side and go off the edge of the paper. And see, parts of my paper are already starting to dry. So with my fine mister, I'm going to start misting and keeping this paper wet throughout this whole underpainting. So I'm going to put just a little bit more pink now, maybe over here in this corner. Interlock with some of the yellow. Maybe a little more up here. Because wherever I put the pink, I can get some orange, but I can also get some purples later when I put the blue down. So I'm thinking about all those possibilities. Okay, now I'm going to come in with cobalt blue. Cobalt blue is a perfect primary color. It's a color that has absolutely no yellow in it and no red in it. When I put it over my yellow, I might get a little bit of green. Although it's kind of strange, this particular cobalt blue doesn't want to be anything but blue. It's just the way it is. I've never seen anything like it. It's a very independent color. So I'm just going to go a little bit darker. You can see I just came in with a little heavier dose here. And I'm going to kill this corner down here. So I'm actually going to put color in all of these corners. All these corners are going to have color all the way to the edge. And I'm going to build up the color as we go along here. It's okay if you go into your flowers just a little bit. Don't get worried about it. Just have a good time with this. After all, this is alla prima. When you do this, finish this background, you are done. It's a all at once kind of thing. So now I'm going to put a little over here so I can get some lovely purples. And don't be afraid if your colors turn gray. I really like that because then it makes the subject matter really pop out. Now, one of the things that's really, really important is you have to have your edges soft. So can you see how those edges are kind of getting very hard now. So what I'm going to do is just take a round brush with some clean water, shake it out, touch it on a towel or tissue, and see, I'm going to come in and push back those edges so that all these edges are soft. Now the fun starts. We're going to take some pieces of this enroute paper and simply set it into these colors. Now when you set them into the color, they don't necessarily absorb it right away. And just do little pieces. Don't be doing anything too big, and try to stay out of your subject. So one of the things that's important is to take a sprayer and your finger, make sure your finger's clean, and then just touch these little tissues. And what they do is they will then absorb the color, and they do get darker. Isn't that fun? I love this. And the other thing you have to be concerned about is the enroute paper comes with cut edges. And if you put a cut edge down, you end up with a hard edge. I'll show you. And what you do is you end up with a cut edge in an area. It gives you a straight line. See that straight line? I find that kind of distracting when you're trying to paint it later. Now if you want to, you could put that straight line next to your stem, for example. Put it next to the stem and it would pop it out. But then you'd have to put another hard piece with a straight edge on the other side, and that would help pop it out. And it's pretty hard to see, so I'm just going to go over it with a little color so you can see what I'm talking about. See how cool that is? So I'm almost done. I'm just going to put a few more of these in. There, that's pretty much enough of the enroute. Now I'm going to take this lovely paper. This is the Oguru. And when I grab the Oguru, you can see it's got real heavy fibers. It's also got a straight edge that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to pull that right off. And what I love to do is to get this Oguru to kind of go from one of my papers, possibly like this, even reaching into the path of light here. Isn't that fun? Beautiful, beautiful textures. Now I'm going to have a little fun with what we call color sanding. And I selected a beautiful stencil. The stencil happens, this is a new one. It's letters. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it over here, kind of going into our transitional area. And I'm going to use some watercolor pencils. Now these are the Kimberly Watercolor pencils, and they're also all nice and sharpened. This is a 100 grit sandpaper. And I'm going to color sand the same colors that I'm working on. So I happen to be in a blue. Over here I've got a little bit of yellow. So I'm going to color sand just a little yellow. And then over here I've got kind of a red. So I'm just going to color sand a little bit of orange. It's close enough to give us a nice little pattern. Look at that. Ooh, that is so much fun. And now let's see, let's do another one. I don't have very many open areas. I guess I'll do one right here. And again, there's a little bit of orange here, reddish color. And let's do just a little bit of yellow up here. And then a little bit of blue where the blue is. I'm actually putting it right over the Oguru paper. Here we have a nice little, there you can see the paper going right through it. So we're getting very close to letting this dry now. One of the things I need to worry about is, was that paper wet enough for this color sanding to really bond with the paper? And just in case, I'm going to take my sprayer. Remember, this is a very fine mister. So when I spray it, I just get this beautiful fine mist. And what I'm going to do with my hand held relatively high, I'm going to spray into the color Sandy to make sure that the paper surface is wet. What that does is it sets that watercolor pencil. Those fine shavings become bonded with the paper. And that's the only way they're going to stay there. When I come back later and paint, I'll be able to paint over these and they will not disappear. They might soften a little more than they would on a cold press paper. Remember, hot press paper does lift, so that is going to be one of the things we have to deal with. But it'll be okay. Another thing I love is I love the transitions you get from salt when you go from a white area into a mid-tone area. So I'm just going to put a little bit of salt, and again, salt only works if there's moisture on the paper. So I'll put a little moisture down. I'll put just a little salt in some of these areas that are bordering on the white shape. So now all we have to do is let this dry and just think, we are done with our underpainting. All we have to do when we come back now is paint the subject. Well, here we are. The paper is now perfectly dry and I've gotten rid of the salt. The salt didn't do much. There's just a little bit of texture here, and I do like what salt does. I love those little broken shapes. I forgot to paint some of these lupines out of focus in the background, so I highly recommend you consider doing that. While the paint is still wet, you take a small script brush, that's this one right here, and just paint a few of these wet into wet. Don't even draw them in, just paint them freehand. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful. But I did make that air, so I'm not going to change that. Because these are ditch flowers, just poppies you find on the roadside, and lupines, we have those all over our ditches up here. They're one of the most populated flowers in Bayfield County. They are growing in the ditches, so that means there's grasses all over. So I'm going to show you how to paint grasses. You can see how fun they are. Now, I'm just going to take a little Quin Gold here and a little Antwerp Blue. Those are my favorite colors for making greens. And I'm going to use my script brush, which is the perfect brush for doing these skinny grasses. Oh, it's so fun. Now, a lot of people, when they do their grasses, they get real stiff. They go like this. And they perfectly space these. Have you ever seen grasses like that? I hope that doesn't look familiar to you. So one of the things that I'm trying to get you to think about is to put a little bend in them. Look how lovely that is. See, the grasses have a lovely bend. So first of all, we're going to put in the stem there. And you'll notice that the top of the grasses always go up. So by putting my tip down and then pressing it, I can get that beautiful petal. And then we'll do another one. Tip, press, and see they go up. Even these are still in an upward motion. And you'll notice they alternate. So I'm going to go down over here, paint another one, press, and just let that one go a little different. Try to make them all a little different. I'll even add one up here. And then this one over here is starting to go off to the side. Alternate, press, go off to the side. These are really fun to do. As they come down, they start drooping a bit. Look at down here at the bottom. See how when they get lower, and there's even more, I didn't pick the whole grass, they start to go in a downward motion. So then you do your tip up, press, and come down with it. And the lower you get, the more they go down. So I hope you enjoy doing this. Another thing I should have done in my underpainting was to put some of these in out of focus. And one of the things you want to do is interlock this grass. There's so much stuff in the way that it's kind of hard to interlock it. You can see I had to go in between a lot of things here. Be sure you get that bend, really important. Don't make these like soldiers. Remember, the very first tips go up. So tip, press, up, tip, press, straight up, hold your brush upright, tip, press, tip, press. Now they're going to start to go downhill a little bit. Tip, press. And every one of these are just really fun to do. Press. Sometimes you can go behind your subject. In fact, I recommend you do. But people always like to take the path of least resistance, and so they end up putting these grasses, like right here, there's nothing there. That's where they put a grass. The idea is to put these so they're in the background, and they're interlocking with the shapes that are already here. Now it's so crowded down here, I'm not going to do too much more. Next thing I want to do is move into the lupines. Now lupines are a busy flower. I'm going to take about a size 6 round brush, and I'm going to start the lupine with a sunny side. So I'm going to do a purple one, and then it's going to have a shadow side that's going to have the blue color. When you mix these two together, you're going to get purple. When you draw these lupines, it's really important that you draw them with sometimes a petal in front of the stem, sometimes a petal over a petal over a petal. And it's amazing to me when I watch people, they look at a photograph of a lupine, for example, and here's what they draw. They get these little Pac-Men and they come out and they're exactly the same, right across from each other, exactly the same. And it looks like it's been run over by a truck. Now make sure when you're drawing these, you put some over the stem. You can have some that interlock with other flowers. So you're getting this 360 degrees of space. Let's get started here. How fun is this? Like I say, I've got my number 6 brush, so that's going to give me lots of control here. Now these are very green at the top, so I'm going to start down a few petals. And this is the Simply Pure Pink. This is Permanent Rose. I'm only going to paint about half of that one. Keep your paint real fluid. And over here we're just going to paint the one going halfway over. Here we have another little fella. You can see some of the color change here when we run over the papers. Okay, now we're going to move into the purple. So now I'm going to do a mixture that's the pink and the blue. You can see we're starting to get closer to the shadow side. And on the bottom of these, I'm going to make some of them a little darker. And I need to lose some of these edges. It's just sort of one of the characteristics of hot press paper. It doesn't move the same as it does on a cold press paper. Over here, this one's behind, I'll make it just a little bit darker. Now, as I get to the other side, I'm going to go into this very dark color. And this is going to give us a nice transition here between the sun side and the shadow side. So you can see it doesn't take very long. And now we're going to come in and just put a little more pink on this half. And then what I like to do is just add a little pink into the ones that are out here on the shadow side. And then of course we have to wet our brush and just sort of come in and lose some of those edges because the paint doesn't really move much. So give it a little, just help it a little bit. Okay, now we're ready to paint some of the greens. So we're going to take Quin Gold, Antwerp Blue. I like this combination. It's kind of a nice olivey. It's almost a sap green. And then I'm going to start by painting the stem, and the tops of these are almost always green. They haven't opened up yet, so they're still like little buds. See, normally it would pick up more of that color and kind of mix together because they're wet, but they're not moving. So that means I'm going to have to move it. So I'm going to take a little bit of pink, add it into the green, add a little bit of that pinky color into the stem, because if you ever look closely at the stem of especially lupines, they're very purple. But almost every flower has the color of the flower in the stem. So it's an important element to add. So there you go. Now we have the lupine pretty much painted. The lupines come in many, many colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this color here to a blue. So on this one, I'm going to start with a cobalt blue, and I'm going to go into a manganese blue. So we'll have two different colors here. So on our sun side, we're going to start with the manganese. This is a beautiful color. It has a little yellow in it. It's a color I really love. Paint the stem too. And then I'm going to come over here with the cobalt. Of course, I'm going to touch a little cobalt into each one of these. Hey, it's moving now. This is a good thing. And then I'm going to paint the cobalt blue on the shadow side. And then we could even take a little bit of this purple left over from our other one and put that on the shadow side too. Just warm it up a bit. Make sure those edges are blended. Now we're ready for the green. The top ones are always green. The stem is green. As in the other one, I'm going to pick up some of these colors and put them in the stem too. So there you can see two lupines, and how lovely it is just to have those two color changes. Okay, we're going to move into our poppies. I love poppies. Look at this. So when we paint the poppies, what we want to do is we want to show that when the light is touching it, it's going to appear to be yellow or even the white of the paper. And then we're going to go into kind of an orange color, so yellow and orange color, and then a very dark color. And these can be adjusted later, but for starters, you try to get this beautiful light to mid-tone dark, light mid-tone dark, dark, so that your petals aren't all the same. So let's start out over here. I'm going to use some Winsor yellow where the light is touching it. I'm going to use Scarlet Lake for the orangey part. It's a beautiful glowing color. These are all transparent colors. And I'm going to use Alizarin Crimson, which is the darkest red on my palette. And that will be the color I use for the darkest areas. So right now, I want to start with this back petal. And this is how you always start painting flowers. You always start with the petal in the back. You'd be surprised how many people don't, but it's really important. Now that's pretty flat looking. I might just add a little bit of this beautiful Scarlet Lake just to give it a little touch. And over here too, this is going to be pretty flat. It's the petal that's against the white background. So we're definitely going to have kind of a flat look here. Then we'll put this deep, deep color down here. So we're going from light to dark. At least this one's got a little more transition in it. Then, when this dries, you come in and paint the petal next to it. So it's sort of a game. Let's go over here and do one more. This is a petal that's next to the white background, so I'm going to make it fairly dark. But I'm going to put a little bit of the Scarlet Lake at the beginning. And then I'm going to come in with the Alizarin Crimson. Now when you touch parts where you have those little pieces of Enru rice paper, sometimes your edges get a little lost. And there isn't anything you can do about it. Just like it. You have to like it. That's the thing. And if you don't like it, there is something you can do. I lied. What you can do is just wet that paper and remove it. So if any of those papers give you trouble, just simply go ahead and wet them and you can remove them. Now I'm ready to think about moving to the next ones. But I'll tell you one thing I like to do. When I have these little, I call them the sex organs. They're these, I don't know if they're pistils or stamens, but anyway, they're black on the poppy. So if you just take some phthalo green and Alizarin Crimson, these are two staining colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel here. And with my smaller script brush, what I like to do is to put a few of these dark shapes like this in while it's still wet. Usually they go out of focus. This hot press paper, it doesn't go out of focus quite as much. That's okay. And then I love to paint the centers, these black centers that radiate around. So we'll put those in right now. There, we got a good start here. Now we're ready. This, I'm sure, is dry enough that I can come in with my yellow right against this dark color. And it'll be yellow over here too. It'll be orange up here because it's against the white background. And then we're going to come in with our alizarin crimson and put this darker color down here. And again, I frequently will come in with my brush and just soften them a little bit. Lift a little color, blend them. They look just a little bit better that way. These were both the same, so I'm going to pull this one down. So the highlight's here and the highlight's a little bigger over here. Again, we're ready to take our script brush, come in with the black, and put in those black pistils or stamens, whatever they are. You notice I left a few white shapes too, that's kind of cool. And we'll put a few black shapes over here too. So this is how I would continue with the poppies. It would just be petal by petal by petal. Now when it comes time to paint the stem, what you do is you take your script brush, wet the stem. I'm wetting it with my Winsor yellow, and then I'm going to come in with a little Antwerp blue. This is going to form a stem that's partially yellow and partially green. That's what we like. Then I'm going to come in with more Antwerp and make it even darker. First time the color moves, second time it kind of stays where you put it. So you can see now we have a beautiful darker value over here, which happens to be on my shadow side. And then a very cool way to pull the red of the poppy into the stem is to use a color sanding technique. Now because the only thing wet here is the stem, what I can do is take and color sand this red right into that stem and then dust away the rest of it, which is not a good idea to blow it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold it over my garbage, and look at how beautiful that is. We have the red coming down, but in a beautiful speckly way. And if you want it a little more solid, very often it's a little more solid up at the top, you can color it in, move it down, and then about here you'd quit. So, hope you enjoyed that little trick. Now, remember how I did these stamps with the lettering? Right now I'm going to take out some of this lettering, just a little bit of it. And what I like to do is put it in a transitional area. One thing I would never do is just stick this out in the middle of nowhere like that. That would be a bad thing. But if I wanted to put this into an area that is partly a somewhat dark area and partly in a light area, this is how I would do it. And this is how I glued down all these little pieces of en route paper. I actually didn't talk about that, but before I came back on camera, I took Yes paste, and you can see how thin it is. And you wipe off most of it. I just use a 1-inch flat brush. And then pressing this down, see how easily I can just add that over and create an interesting little textural area. I'm going to pull out a little bit more here. Let's add this one over here. Again, wipe off most of the glue. It doesn't take a whole bunch of glue, but you do want it to completely penetrate through that paper and bond with your paper behind it. Well, I had one other thing I wanted to show you. This is really cool. These buds are so fun to paint. Now, a lot of people buy their green paint in a tube. This just blows my mind. I don't buy green paint except for phthalo green that I use as a tool to make darks. So I'm going to show you the proper way to paint with greens, according to me. I've got a little now Windsor yellow on here. I'm going to pull it down the stem. Then I'm going to take some Antwerp blue and come in here and down the stem on the shadow side. Now you have two things you can do. You can add a red paint, which is lovely. So if I wanted to take a little Scarlet Lake, I could just put this on here, because these are really very gray. And when you mix these colors together, they turn gray. And I could also take that color down the stem. But I'm going to show you that color sanding trick too. This is very cool. So just a little color sanding on there, and the color sanding going down the stem. Love this. Very cool. And then another thing, these little guys are fuzzy. They're hairy. So if you just take you can use the back of your brush, but sometimes that gets a little heavy. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm just making these little hairs here with my palette knife. And don't make them so heavy that it looks like a caterpillar, but you have to do this while it's wet. But there you have the stem, and the last thing you need to do with these little stems is to put just a little bit of salt in them. The salt gives these beautiful spotted shapes, which are very characteristic of these little buds before they open up. And during the drying time now, these colors will gray up a little bit more. So I'm just going to go off camera and finish painting this picture, and I'll come back and show you when I'm done. Well, this is almost completed now. I had a lot of fun doing this. It's really fun because you're not involved in negative painting. You're simply painting the positive subject. You paint all these a petal at a time, thinking about, okay, if it's dark back here, I'm going to make it light here. And if the background's light, which it pretty much is, that means almost all the stems are dark. So I tried to get as much variety as I could. Some greener, some redder, some lighter, some bluer, some whatever. I just tried for as much variety as I could. I wish I had gotten just a little bit darker on my first layer when I did all the wet into wet stuff. And I think if you try it, you don't be afraid to go a little darker. I was a little bit on the wimpy side, but I think it still works, and you can still see my path of light. Now the last thing I wanted to share with you is another sommelier technique. For example, in here, this is the typical foliage of the lupine. And if you take a round brush, I could use one a little bigger, but this will work. This is a number 6. What you do is you hold the brush in the upright position again, and you press and then release, and you get that nice long line. It's really very, very neat. I see I had to fix that one up just a little. Let's try it again. So you hold the tip up, come down, press, and then release. Oh, much better. And it's really very cool. You get kind of a nice light-dark relationship going. And I do have the color mix. This isn't one of those techniques that relies on you do it first one color and then come in and charge another color. Try to give this as much variety as you can. I just have a few left to do here. Press and release. Now, I did have this drawn ahead of time, so I am going to come in and fill in around that. I like to do it while it's wet. There you go. Well, I hope you enjoy this alla prima style of working. All at once. Just let it happen and enjoy it.